What's up, ladies and gentlemen? I'm Vigilante. You're watching the Vigilante Effect. And a couple of hours ago, Guns4Hire has posted a video on the Zero Mosque, which is, to be honest, a way overdue response. And usually, I don't respond to specific people regarding specific subjects like this. But I felt the need because of the fact that he has such a strong following, and he made a lot of erroneous statements, which I felt that needed to be clarified. So just to state his points real quickly, he basically has 5 points that I didn't agree with mainly. The first point was building a mosque is not proper because people still feel the sting. The second point is the mosque should be outside the island in the sense that it shouldn't even be built on Manhattan at all. 3, Christianity caused more death in the world than Islam. 4, just as crusades are caused by only Bible, violence is the core of the Quran. While at the same time he stated that extremists are the ones who take that approach. So I'm going to get into that. And he basically based all of this on his recent visit to New York City and his general knowledge of religion. Now, I've lived in New York City for about 12 years. I go in and out of the city all the time. I go to 42nd Street, Times Square, the Ground Zero site, in front of the Empire State Building. All over the place. I would go to the Bronx, Queens, Brooklyn, Manhattan, everything, right? So I'm very acquainted with the city that I lived in and I grew up in. I'm a New Yorker at heart, after all. Also, I'm a Muslim. So I would think I would have a little bit more knowledge and leverage than Guns in this particular topic in regards to, first of all, knowledge of the city. Second of all, knowledge of the religion. So now to the first point, which is building a mosque is not proper because people still feel the sting. Now, granted, this is a way overdue topic to even talk about. I think it happened over about a year ago. But I think it's important for people to know the location of the mosque because we keep calling it the Ground Zero Mosque. But it's actually located at 45 Park Place, which is not near Ground Zero. It's near Ground Zero, but a couple of blocks away. You can't see Ground Zero from there. So it's not right in front of Ground Zero as you might believe. But let's see what is in front of Ground Zero. What is in front of Ground Zero is Vineyard Christian Fellowship. And what's maybe like 1 or 2 blocks away is St. Peter Roman Catholic Church. All right? So that's one thing. That's a little bit of hypocrisy there. The second thing is, let's talk about the victims of 9/11. There's an estimate of 32 Muslims who died during 9/11, including 6 women, among them 1 who was 7 months pregnant. So to say that the Ground Zero site is only sensitive to non-Muslims is basically to disclude and disrespect the deaths of those Muslims who actually died during that attack. And these 32 Muslims were not the ones who were committing the suicide bombing, just in case someone had a funny idea. Now let's examine this notion that the presence of the mosque would leave a sting in the wounds of the family's victims. First of all, to have that feeling and using the mosque as a symbol for 9/11 only supports Muslim hate and discrimination. And it implies that Islam was responsible for 9/11 when in reality that was not the case. Just because someone lost loved ones doesn't justify propagating hate towards a group who was not responsible for the attacks. People really shouldn't feel the sting when they see a mosque as the media has portrayed it. People should feel the sting when they see murders and atrocities of the same nature around the world, and they should fight against that, not against people who did them no harm. And if you want to talk about not having a mosque even near Ground Zero, then you might as well talk about not having a church near Ground Zero, or else you're completely going against freedom of religion. To gear that point a little bit more closer to home, Guns has proclaimed that he's a Buddhist. Now let's examine Buddhists. In Burma, which is about 90% Buddhists, they have been documented as one of the most repressive regimes. And in recent times, a couple of months ago, scores of Muslims were killed and tens of thousands exiled by Buddhists. These are civilian Muslims. The government has been repeatedly documented of displaying discrimination and persecution of the Muslim and Christian population of that area. So should we say that there should not be a Buddhist temple built? The answer to that, by any person who is logical and is fair, would be no, because these Buddhists' actions don't represent their religion, but represents their individual actions. For me to deny the entire population of Buddhists to build a Buddhist temple would mean for me to be illogical. Another example, let's say someone who is from African American descent was to kill someone from a Caucasian descent family. And this victim's family, they now have hatred towards African Americans. They don't want to see a flag that represents Africa in front of them because it reminds them of the killing of their family member and it puts salt in their wounds. Now, something like that would be completely racist. This is not justified. Yes, it's understandable that a person is going to feel the sting when his family members are harmed, but it doesn't mean that it justifies that person engages in racism against all blacks. Just like it doesn't justify that because of 9/11, families of the victims should have hate towards Muslims or should have resentment towards a mosque, which represents Islam, which doesn't represent the actions of these people that committed these atrocities. And we're going to get into more detail about that. Now, my second point is that the mosque shouldn't even be in the island. It should be outside of Manhattan completely. My response to that is simply this. Many Muslims run the businesses in the city. For instance, many of the cart foods that you would find on the streets of 42nd Street are run by Muslims. Delis, jewelry, you name it, are run by Muslims. And they contribute to the economy. And these Muslims, they need a place to pray, as all religions have a place to pray. So stating that they should be out of the island is no different than basically saying, use them and kick them out when it comes to their rights. It's just complete hypocrisy, to be honest. His third point was to say that Christianity caused more death in the world than Islam. Well, let's examine this statement. People who are categorized as Christian have engaged in the tragedies of the Crusades. Christians have propagated the Inquisition. Christians have engaged in the witch hunts. Christians have killed the Native Americans and took their lands by force, bringing disease to the lands. Christians have engaged in and propagated the slave trades, kidnapping Africans out of their lands, whilst raping their women and abusing them through the course of history through slavery, which still has its remnants in racism to date. Christians were filled with greed for natural resources and bombarded the world with imperialism. Christians dropped 2 nukes on Japan, killing about 226,000 people, innocent civilians. 2 nukes on 2 cities. An anti-Muslim Christian killed 77 people in a bomb and shoot in Norway earlier this year. Christians continue to rape, kill, fraud, hate, discriminate, and terrorize. And the list goes on. Now, let's examine Christianity. Christianity says, in the Bible, one of the teachers of the law came and heard them debating in reference to Jesus and somebody else. Noticing that Jesus had given them a good answer, he asked him, of all the commandments, which is the most important? The most important one, answered Jesus, is this. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. The second is this. Love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these. So obviously there's a discrepancy here between what Christianity says and what these Christians that I've listed have said. Just because these Christians, no matter who they are, even if it was the Pope, have engaged in these criminal acts and have killed civilians, doesn't mean that Christianity is the one that killed. Because Christianity is one thing and the Christians are their own individual thing. They did these things because of their own personal attributes, not because of what Christianity taught them, because obviously Christianity is teaching something different. Which leads to his fourth point, which was, just as the Crusades are caused by only the Bible, violence is the core of the Quran. At the same time, he was stating that this is only followed by extremists, and they're the ones who, take that approach. Now, to say these two things and to say that I'm not trying to offend Muslims, I'm not trying to offend religion, I think is, with all due respect to guns, I think is very hypocritical. Inevitably, it's stating that if you're a Muslim who follows the Quran and you follow it to the T, that means you're an extremist. Which means that basically every single Muslim is an extremist. I mean, this is what his statement would lead to. So now let's look at what the actual cores of the Quran are. The actual core of the Quran is to worship one God. I challenge anybody, pick up the book, pick up the Quran, read it. Read it from cover to cover. And you tell me what is the focus of the Quran. Is the focus to kill non-Muslims? Or is the focus to worship one God and to do good to others? You tell me. And if you look at the statements of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he said, one of his statements, he said that he was not sent as a messenger except that he were to perfect manners. He came to perfect manners and the character of people. And manners with what? Manners with people and manners with God. To be merciful with others, to be forgiving, to be tolerant. And the Quran is filled with scores and scores of verses about forgiveness and mercy. Let's also look at some of the things that the Quran mentions. The Quran does legislate war, but it legislates war when the nation is established under government rule as any nation has a military. Even the game Civilization, you have to have a military. It's one of the things. It's not just about love and roses. You have to have a military so you can have a protected civilization. So the Quran permits having a military, but with stipulations. War is never permitted against non-Muslims just for the sake of them being non-Muslims. War is never permitted for oppression. War is never permitted for killing any innocent. You cannot kill women. You cannot kill elderly. You cannot kill non-combatants. You cannot kill worshippers. You cannot kill civilians, trees, or animals. So you cannot kill a priest. You cannot kill any monks. So for instance, all these drone attacks that are taking place in Afghanistan and Pakistan, there's a strong possibility that you can kill a civilian. But now when you look at the Obama administration, they didn't give any details as to how they're going to guarantee the civilians' lives. There's not supposed to be civilian casualties in Islam. It's just you only fight combatants, those who fight you, and only under military rule, not civilians. War was only legislated after Muslims were persecuted and exiled from their land and placed under tremendous torture. So at the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, the Muslims were persecuted by the Arabs of Mecca for years and years on end, but never did the Muslims fight back and kill them. Why? Because the Muslims were not in a state of government. You're not supposed to just haphazardly go and kill somebody. This is not the way that Islam teaches. Any time that there's any sort of punishment is only to be done under the court of law or under a military confrontation. And in Islam, war is compulsory to defend against invaders and to fight a nation which is oppressive. Peace treaties are strongly recommended, and the aim in Islam is peace, not war. But war is permitted when necessary. You are not allowed to break peace treaties. And killing yourself is not permitted. Just look in the Quran. The Quran tells you, you cannot kill yourself. The Prophet Muhammad said, if you kill yourself, then you basically gave yourself a ticket to the hellfire. And you're going to keep killing yourself in the same fashion that you did until the day of judgment. And it's impossible that Islam taught suicide bombing when there was no such thing as bombing in the time of the Prophet or the time of Islam. So it's obviously just by common sense that this is something that's not taught by the religion. Another thing, you cannot force someone to become a Muslim. This is something that's against Islam. It's clearly stated in the Quran where it says there is no compulsion in religion. And now with regards to any verse in the Quran, any verse that's about war or violence, I challenge you, read the verse, read the whole chapter from the beginning all the way up to the verse, and read after the verse. And you tell me if you don't understand exactly what's going on. And don't only just read it in the context of the text, but read it in the context of the history. Who was it addressing? Was it just addressing everybody, or was it just addressing? Now, with regards to my personal opinion about the mosque being built around ground zero or near ground zero, as mentioned before, I personally don't think it's the best idea because of the opposition that it would get. Now, at the same token, while I say that, I'm not condemning someone for wanting to build a mosque near ground zero, because they should have the right to do so. As a nation, we should be ashamed of ourselves for the fact that we're having an issue with a house of worship being built, regardless of where it's going to be built. So with all due respect to Guns, I was really disappointed in his video. I felt like it was full of ignorance and basically faulty facts, both about religion and just history in general. And at the end of the day, the responsibility of finding out and seeking knowledge before speaking is upon every single individual. It's upon you. Everything's up to you. The choice is yours in terms of what you want to think and your opinions you want to hold. But I would say if you want to hold an opinion and you want to stay strict to it, I would say do your research first. Look into history. Read the history books. Don't just look into the whole anti-Islamic sites. Don't just listen to the hate mongers before you say something that will basically make you look foolish and uneducated.
You have 2 vids to click, so choose your pick and watch the video, but make sure you like it. Subscribe to this channel and you won't regret. Follow my social networks and you'll be all set. I'm Vigilante and you've been watching The Vigilante Effect.